So our last speaker for the day is Dr. Bruce Morton. Bruce is a professor in the Department of Psychology at Western University. He completed his PhD at the University of Toronto under the supervision of Dr. Sandra Trehub and Phil Zalazzo. He worked as a postdoctoral fellow in the laboratory of Dr. Yuko Munakata. And Dr. Morton's research interests concern the development of cognitive control and its association with changes in prefrontal cortex function, which especially cognitive control is a hugely important thing. Dr. Morton today is going to talk about child development research and mobile technology and how we can use mobile technology to, or harness it, I guess, for research, and talk about the possibilities and pitfalls.
Okay, thanks, Rob, very much. I'm just going to try sharing my screen now. Are you seeing my developmental research and mobile measurement technology screen here?
I can, yep.
Okay, so I don't know actually if I just go into presentation mode?
Yep, you have to embiggen it. There you go.
Like that?
Yep.
Super. Okay, great. We're ready to go. So I just wanted to thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in today's research day. I've always attended the Goldberg Developmental Disabilities talks and have found it to be a very, very stimulating meeting, and today is proving to be no exception. So very, very nice to be a part of this. So as a developmental psychologist, I spend a lot of time thinking about ways of measuring how children think about the world. And as a parent of two young kids, I spend a lot of time driving around London, taking my kids to various extracurricular activities and picking them up again. And so it was in the fall, pre-COVID, that I jumped into my car on a Saturday around noon and made my way over to pick up my daughter, who had just started taking art lessons about a 10-minute drive from my house. And as I got in the car, I got thinking, and I can't really remember the reason why, but I got thinking about whether it would be possible to administer Jean Piaget's A not B task to infants around 9 to 12 months of age. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Piagetian A not B task, it's a very simple little task. And the infant typically sits on the lap of the parent and watches as, and I'm just going to try and find out where that the little laser pointer thing is. Is that under annotate? No, mouse. Just trying.
I can't speak for anybody else, Bruce, but I can certainly see your. Oh, I lost it. I had your mouse there for a second, and now it's gone.
Oh, did you? Okay, hang on one sec. I'm just going to see.
It's in the lower corner of the screen where you see a little pencil there, and it says laser mouse.
Where is it, Julio?
The lower corner of the screen, left on the PowerPoint menu when you have the presentation on.
Oh, okay.
It says laser mouse, and that's it. You just activate.
All right, maybe I'll just try mouse here. Can you see the mouse?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So the infant sits on the lap of the parent and watches as a toy is hidden at this A location. And then after a brief delay, the infant then is given the opportunity to reach for the toy at the A location, and they retrieve the toy. And then the toy is taken away from the infant, and the infant watches as the toy then is again hidden at the A location. And so this is repeated 3 or 4 or 5 times, establishing a prepotent tendency for the infant then to search for the toy when it's hidden at the A location. Then on the next trial then, or on the B trials then, the experimenter shows in clear view to the infant that now the toy is going to be hidden at this new B location. So the toy disappears out of view, but in this hiding location. And after a brief delay, then the infant is given an opportunity to search for the toys. And if the delay period is long enough, in the neighborhood of say 5 to 10 seconds for an infant 9 months of age, then the infant, rather than searching for the toy at the B location, which they've just seen the toy hidden at, the infant will perseverate and search for the toy at the A location. So this is a very robust phenomenon. It's been well documented by many psychologists dating back to the time of Jean Piaget. And it continues to, of course, generate interest amongst developmental researchers. And so I got into my car back in the fall, and I was thinking, gosh, it should be possible to, deliver such a task to infants on a tablet. And I was very much immersed in thinking about how one might go about implementing this and how useful it would be, and so on and so forth. And I was deeply immersed in thinking about all this as I headed off to pick up my daughter. And it just so happened that about 50 meters down the road from where my daughter's art lessons was a dance studio. And my screen won't advance anymore. Shoot. Hang on a second. Why? It's not working. No control. Annotate. Yes. So about 50 meters down the road from where my daughter's dance studio, or my daughter's, the studio where she was taking these art lessons, was a dance studio where she had studied for 2 years. And sure enough, I was driving, I was thinking about this task and so on. And then I got into the parking lot, and I was driving along and thinking, gosh, I don't remember the parking lot of the dance studio being so busy on Saturday mornings. And I was thinking, gosh, I can't find any place to park. And then, of course, it occurred to me that I had committed exactly the same error, that I had been thinking of developing a task to administer on a tablet to infants. Namely, I'd gone back to this location, which I had habitually gone to for 2 years prior, rather than going to the appropriate location, the art studio where my daughter was. In any case, you may be asking yourselves, well, like what's all this concern about tasks and developing tasks for to kids? And if you're interested in studying an aspect of intellectual functioning, such as executive functioning or cognitive control, wouldn't it just be easier, especially for young children, say, infants, toddlers, preschool age children, and so on, wouldn't it just be easier to ask the parents how the children are performing in these different domains of cognitive and emotional functioning? And the answer, I suppose, is yes. You could, in fact, measure these aspects of children's cognitive functioning through the administration of survey instruments. And indeed, there are many available, which are widely used amongst researchers, certainly in the context of clinical assessment. So one, for instance, is called the Behavioral Rating Inventory of Executive Functioning. And this is a 60-odd item survey that can be administered to parents, and that provides the clinical assessor or the researcher information about children's cognitive, emotional, and behavioral self-regulation, and gives you an indication, as well as the likelihood that, given the behavioral profile, that the child is at risk for some sort of clinical disorder. And indeed, disorders of executive functioning are widely observed across many different clinical profiles, from children with ADHD to children with ASD, children with obsessive compulsive disorders, conduct disorders, and so on. So evidence of an executive functioning problem is certainly not a specific indication of a specific problem, but it usually comes part and parcel with need for clinical attention. So surveys are useful, but for developmental psychologists such as myself, who are very much interested in experimental research, and are interested in processes that are much more proximal to cognitive and neural mechanisms that are at play in the individual child, we're very interested in the use of tasks. So here's another task that is well utilized in the study of executive functioning early in development, called the dimensional change card sort task. And in this task, children are presented with two bins that are marked by target cards, like for instance, a red boat and a blue rabbit. And children then are given test cards that match each of the targets on a single dimension. So this blue boat here, which they need to sort, it matches one target on shape and it matches a second target on color. And so children might be said, okay, might be told, okay, let's play the shape game. And in the shape game, I want you to put the boats in this pile and the rabbits in this pile. And the child would take the blue boat and it would sort it into the bin marked with the red boat. And then after 5 or 6 trials, then the experimenter says to the child, okay, great. How about we play a new game now? Let's play the shape or the color game. And in the color game, the red ones go here and the blue ones go here. And what you find with children around 3.5 years of age is that they will persist in using the first set of rules when given clear instructions to switch and use a new set of rules. And you can start them on shape, and they'll perseverate on shape when asked to switch to color. You can start them on color and they'll perseverate in their use of color when asked to switch to shape. So these tasks then are very interesting, and they've formed the heart of areas in developmental psychology, and certainly have been taken up by labs such as my own for advancing empirical and theoretical work into the origins of cognitive control. And so one of the things I worked on when I was a postdoc in the lab of Yuko Munakata in the University of Denver was to use a computational neural network model as a framework for understanding what's involved in a basic computational sense in the performance of this task. And then also further to try and provide a constrained model about what changes are occurring computationally as the prefrontal cortex develops, and how prefrontal cortex development can contribute to age-related advances in cognitive flexibility, as evidenced in this card sorting task. And from there, of course, we can go back to tasks and we can test certain hypotheses that can be derived from these high-level theoretical models. So in a paper I published with a graduate student in developmental psychology a few years ago, we were able to show that strengthening or increasing the salience of color will assist child in switching from sorting cards by their shape to sorting them by their color. So imagine in this task, children start out by sorting some blue boats by their shape and red rabbits by shape. And then in the post-switch phase, they're then presented with stimuli like this, but that are flanked by these blue flankers. And the results of our experiments would suggest that simply increasing the latent representation or latent strength of color in this way facilitated switching in this card sort task, again, consistent with a hypothesis that was derived from the computational model. In another paper, this one published in Psychological Science, we were able to show that when you first introduced children to sorting some stimuli in the card sorting task by shape, for instance, such as the stimuli at the very top of this diagram here, then if you can again facilitate flexible behavior by relieving children of the need to actually use top-down rules and active maintenance of these top-down rules. as would be predicted by the model, you can relieve them of the need for that and get or shape flexible behavior by simply strengthening the latent representation of color, first by just providing kids with colored stimuli, which they can sort directly, and then we were able to morph the original shapes back into the stimuli, so that we ended up with the same stimuli at the end of this morphing procedure that we started out with. And children were able to persist in using the color rules on these original stimuli, even though they had started out sorting these exact same stimuli by shape. So this was, again, another way in which we can change the standard administration of these tasks to test hypotheses about the nature of flexible behavior and constraints on that flexible behavior evidenced in children 3 to 5 years of age. So tasks are very useful. We've also gone on in subsequent years to adapt these tasks for use in different experimental settings, such as through the use of electroencephalography or functional magnetic resonance imaging. And in the context of these experiments, we were able to demonstrate, demonstrate in this paper with former graduate student Matt Waxer, that tasks such as the dimensional change card sort task actually encompass multiple processes, not just a switching process, but also a conflict management process. And we were able to demonstrate through the use of EEG and behavioral data that there are two dissociable processes involved in the performance of these tasks. And then through the use of fMRI, we were able to look at age-related alterations in functional connectivity in broad executive networks that are engaged by tasks such as the dimensional change card sort task, and also to study dynamics changes or changes in the dynamic composition of high-level executive networks as children perform these tasks. So tasks then are very useful. They take us beyond what information can be gleaned, say, from a survey administered to a parent, and take us close to, or at least one step closer to the internal machinations of a child's mind. And to that extent, they're extremely useful. They can be modified in an endless number of ways to target hypotheses that can be derived from theory and so on. So they're very useful. But that being said, in their conventional administration, they have there are limits to their utility, which is why, back in the fall, I was kind of thinking about how one might administer, for instance, a Piagetian A not B task to an infant using a tablet. And one of the reasons why tasks are not particularly useful, at least in terms of their conventional form of administration, is that for all the time and effort that goes into collecting the data, they don't actually generate that much data. So here in this little photograph shows you what happens when a 3.5-year-old child comes into the lab. So the parent parks, they bring the child in, you meet the parent, you do all the consent procedures and so on. Then the child is brought into a specialized room and they're shown this apparatus with the two little hiding bins, and they're given these cards that they have to sort. The whole operation then is videotaped so that you can code it later. And there's about 10 trials that are normally administered as part of this procedure. And at the end of the whole exercise, basically you get a 1 or a 0, with a 1 indicating that the child successfully switched sorting rules when they were instructed to do so, and a 0 indicating that the child perseverated and persisted in using the first set of rules that they were introduced to when you first showed them the task. So for all of the effort, the task generates basically one kind of binary measurement, a 1 or a 0. So they don't generate a lot of data in final analysis. And it takes a lot of time to get that 1 or a 0, from the recruitment to the running of the child to the coding of the videotape, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very time-intensive process. The second thing is that developmental psychologists get very wedded to tasks, and indeed there are virtual cottage industries that grow up around tasks such as the A not B task and the dimensional change card sort task. And part of the reason people get very wedded to these tasks is that they believe that the tasks provide some precious insight into some fundamental representation that undergoes development in some narrow period of the child's growth. But I think there's good evidence to suggest, not only from our own group, but from otherwise, that even a task as simple as the A not B task or the dimensional change card sort task are by no means process pure. We like to think of them as a measure of task switching or flexible rule use, but there are also aspects of inhibition, conflict management, a small amount of working memory that's required in these tasks, which make them much broader measures than the way that they are typically interpreted by the research community. So none of these tasks are really process pure. They encompass many processes over and above the one that researchers are interested in utilizing these tasks. And finally, the administration of these tasks in their conventional form, at least, are very much lab-based. It's difficult to take these tasks on the road and to move them around, in part because of the need for videotaping and coding and standardization in terms of the administration of these protocols to ensure that their administration, or the score, I should say, of a child on a particular, any version of this task is not contaminated by variations in the environment of in which the child is performing the task, or changes in the experimenter that's actually administering the task. So for that reason, we've been developing means of administering measures of executive functioning on mobile devices, such as a tablet shown here, ACES tablet shown here. And what we do is we take standardized measures of executive functioning and we create a battery of executive functioning tasks. So 6 to 7, 8 different kinds of tasks, all of them multifaceted, all of them gamified, so that they play in a standardized way with an engaging user interface that is readily understood by children, and that often involves a bit of a game narrative, again, to make the instructions for the task of the game transparent to children. And these games run for anywhere around 2 to 3 minutes. And in the course of 10 to 15 minutes, then we can acquire a set of different measures of higher order cognitive functioning. And so here's an example of some of the games that we're working with. So this is a game that we call Tag Me Only. In the game, there are 6 wells that are here, and it's very much like the country fair game Whack-A-Mole. So at one of the 6 locations, a little mole will pop up, and if the mole is not wearing a hat, as is the case here, then the child simply touches the mole. Again, we administer these on a touchscreen tablet computer, so that the child simply needs to touch the mole and earns a point for doing that in a certain time frame. And then in this game, Tag Me Only, the child has to touch only the moles that don't have hats. If a mole shows up wearing a hat, then the child needs to withhold the response, else they will lose a point. So again, this is a very simple game. It's easy to explain to children and returns a measure comparable to what would normally be gleaned using a go, no go task. We can accelerate the presentation of the stimuli, again, to increase the psychometric difficulty of the task, And again, these are things that, that we're working towards allowing the user of the software to parameterize in their interaction with the child. Here's a Tag Me Switch game. So in this game, 3 moles pop up at 3 different locations, all different in color. The child's job is simply to select one of the 3 moles and to find out, based on the performance feedback, whether they happen to correctly choose the mole. If they choose the correct mole, they get a point. If they don't, they lose a point. And here, of course, they can base the responses either on the color or the position of the moles. And they need to learn over successive trials whether the correct response is to choose the brown, the yellow, or the purple one, or the one on the left, the middle, and the right. Once they've reached a threshold on a rule, then the rule changes and they need to relearn the rule. And there can be interdimensional, in other words, a switch to a new color, or you can actually switch from color to location. So there are different kinds of rule switches that are involved in this task. Here's another variant. This one is called Tag Me Size. The child is supposed to touch the mole wearing the numerically larger Arabic symbol, but on certain trials such as this one, the incongruent trials, are a bit difficult because the mole wearing the 4 is actually physically smaller than the mole wearing the 3, and this introduces a small cost to performance as compared to conditions where the larger, physically larger mole also has the numerically larger number on his jersey. And we can measure that again very easily through the administration of trials over a 2-minute time span. So the device then measures these games. Again, some of them are taxing of behavioral inhibition, some of them are taxing of flexibility, others are measuring attentional focusing. And as the games are being acquired in a former instantiation of the software, then basically these data files then are sent back to a virtual server on board the device, which then encrypts and then stores the data locally. And then when the device is then connected to a wireless internet or wireless network, then these data files then are sent back encrypted to a password protected database. So this is very useful for us, and we've used this technology in studies of children in South Korea, Lebanon, and Canada, and as well in China. Here's a picture of us using the technology in public schools in Shanghai. Here we're studying cultural differences between children growing up in collectivist cultures such as those in Lebanon and China compared to individualist cultures such as the culture of Canada. So the technology is very useful because it allows us then to administer a battery of measures that gives us a multidimensional characterization of executive functioning, which is kind of what I was trying to get at with this sort of quasi-pyramid symbol here. We can do latent factor modeling of these tasks so that we can get build an empirically informed model of latent factors underlying executive functioning. We can ensure rapid and encrypted transit of data back from the place of origin in terms of where the data has been collected. And we can ensure the standardization and the administration of these protocols across very, very different research settings, classrooms in Shanghai, in Saida in Lebanon, Canada, South Korea, and so on. And we can also ensure that we're harnessing insights about the engagement of how these tasks engage in executive networks to the extent that we model the design of these tasks, the tasks that we've used for studying executive networks in the brains of children using advanced neuroimaging and electroencephalography procedures. So mobile measurement technology is promising then because it can generate a lot of data. We can increase our sample sizes very quickly, and we can derive a variety of performance measures from any one of these tasks individually, permitting us then to do sophisticated latent variable modeling of processes that presumably underlie something as complex as cognitive control or executive functioning. Plus, the technology moves around. We don't have to bring kids into the lab Instead, we can take the measures out into the world and really take them wherever the child goes. This is particularly relevant right now in the face of a global pandemic where labs are closed and parents are at home hoping to have kids doing interesting things online. These kinds of technologies then afford the opportunity actually to carry on the work of empirical research despite the presence of the pandemic. And we're also very interested in the utilization of these in the context of institutions such as the Child Parent Resource Institute here in London, which again services atypically developing children and families, but is highly challenged, obviously, in the face of a pandemic because all of their assessment procedures rely on a bricks and mortar model of service provision. These kinds of tools can potentially be deployed by institutes such as CPRI to work alongside conventional assessment procedures. Anyways, I'm be very interested in discussing that further, but I'll just move right along here. Of course, there are many caveats, and Ryan's talk and Beth's talk today, I think, really highlight some of that. And one of the point is that when you go log into a database and you collect your data from an international study or whatever, basically you get a bunch of anonymized files that have numerical scores on them, and these scores are just the scores that the children have obtained on the tests. And you hope that those scores are really picking up aspects of children's behavior and thinking that are critical for understanding how they're interfacing with these problems that you've developed. But there's a whole lot of things that are happening as children are doing these tasks that escape the scoring algorithms we use. And Annette Karmeloff-Smith, who was Jean Piaget's perhaps most famous protege, said that she learned more about children's psychology watching children do the tasks that she had developed for them than actually studying the data. So there's a risk here that if we rely too exclusively on these devices and the numerical scores that they generate, that we're going to get a somewhat biased picture, at least, of things, and we're going to miss aspects of children's behavior that might be critical for informing our understanding of the way they think. So one thing that we're very interested in is the fact that a lot of these executive functioning tasks are not exclusively behavioral or cognitive, but they can be richly affective experiences as well. Here's a child doing Walter Mischel's famous marshmallow test, where the child is shown a marshmallow and told not to touch the marshmallow until time is up, and obviously has struggled, unfortunately unsuccessfully, to withhold responding to that marshmallow. And normally what, as psychologists, we do is we just recorded the length of time that it takes the child or the length of time that passes before the child touches the marshmallow. And that's a very powerful measure, no doubt. But it also overlooks the fact that this is a richly affective experience, and there may be many aspects of the child's affective response to these problems that might be highly informative about the way that they manage their thoughts and feelings in the context of executive functioning problems. So to try and get around some of the constraints of relying exclusively just on numerical scores that are generated from these tasks, we're partnering with a company called Neurologics, which has developed software that uses the camera on board mobile devices like phones and tablets and machine learning algorithms. And basically what the Anura software uses is something called transdermal optical imaging, where from the video images that are acquired from a cell phone camera, the software then reconstructs the heart rate. This is based on very subtle changes in the pigmentation of the skin that can be detected by a cell phone. And from heart rate, then you can get a measure of heart rate variability. And from heart rate variability, then you can begin to ascertain aspects of stress that an individual is enduring or experiencing. And those stress-related measures can be collected in real time and set alongside behavioral performance that's being measured in a tablet. So again, I don't mean to sort of come back to concerns of Annette Karmeloff-Smith about exclusive reliance on numbers, but suffice to say that we're sympathetic to the concern and are looking at ways of building additional kind of measurement capabilities into mobile systems so that we can get a multimodal characterization of children's cognitive, behavioral, and emotional self-regulation in a very mobile capacity. So anyways, that's some of the work that we're doing on mobile measurement technology. Again, I think it has a lot of potential for the study of typical cognitive developments and atypical development as well. And I just wanted to thank Rob and the organizers for having me join in the discussion today, my sponsors, and some of my collaborators. And thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you, Bruce. That was a really nice summary of a fascinating area. And I think your point about, I'm not sure if it's the right term, but about sort of, is it ecological validity of some measures?
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm not sure it's quite ecological validity, Rob, but I mean, you know, one thing that you know, from my discussions with you and Julio and Samantha Goldsmith in my lab and others, you know, is that there's a wealth of information that I think that can be gleaned simply by looking at how a child performs a task, and it can be aspects of the way that they're moving. Perhaps the way that they're remaining oriented or not oriented to the screen, and perhaps these things will show up in response time, but perhaps they don't. So I think to the extent that we can measure these things with a mobile system, would suggest that it might be worth doing, because I think there's a wealth of additional information that we get about a child beyond just simply response time and accuracy.
But I guess it'd be hard to know what it is we actually want to measure too, though, right?
Yes, of course, for sure. Yeah, again, that really, I mean, it's hard to design a technology for everybody. So we're focusing on measuring aspects of cognitive, behavioral, and affective self-regulation. So the affective part, we haven't really managed. I guess we haven't done a great job yet. Like a go, no-go task or an interference management task or a flexibility task might be great from a behavioral or from a cognitive self-regulation standpoint. What we're interested in, I guess, is the next kind of next horizon is to try and develop tasks that will introduce a frustration component and will require kids to manage that frustration in order for them to win a certain set of points. And what we're excited about is tethering the behavioral, like the technology that will allow us to administer that frustration task, to tether that together with technology that allow us to monitor in real time the degree of affective arousal.
But people won't be sufficiently frustrated they're going to break the thing?
Well, possibly. I don't know.
Good insurance. So there's a question from Claire Mitchell. So Claire, I've sent something asking you to unmute yourself.
Great. Great. Thank you for that talk. I was just quite intrigued by the last little bit of technology that you talked about, in which the coloring was going to give heart rate. And my mind began to think about that, and it seems that skin color and all sorts of things might interfere with that data. So I'm just wondering why you would want to do that rather than use what's readily available non-invasive monitoring of heart rate, you know, and probably some other things as well. It would just mean that the child would have to have a little patch on or something like that.
Yeah, right. So exactly. So what I'm, and you're right. So and the good news on that front, I suppose, is that those are technical challenges that that are sort of in the domain of our partner in this enterprise, the Neurologics company. So obviously part of what they're doing is ensuring that the technology works across individuals with different skin colors and skin tones. That's their technical challenge. Suffice to say that that their technology has been patented as for instance, as a contactless means of measuring blood pressure and for measuring heart rate. As to why one would want to use that rather than just a regular electrode. Again, what I'm trying to envision here is a mobile instrument that would allow one to do this. So if I imagine designing a study here in London, Ontario, and then deploying that in China, it's going to be more difficult. It's going to be difficult for me to get all that the gear and then ship it to China and then to train all of my research assistants in China as to how those electrodes and various other kinds of things need to be set up on the kids. If I can design a technology that will harness that data from the child through one platform, then it makes procedurally the job of kind of farming out protocols to different parts of the world much easier for me.
Right, thank you.
So other questions for Bruce or comments upon the high quality of his work?
Bruce, I would like a small question. When you are, one of the experiences that we have working with the virtual environments is that the tasks are not, they don't have a trial structure. So basically you could be switching from an attentional challenge into a working memory challenge or inhibition challenge. When you have the task in the tablets, I know that we still, some of them keep the repetitive nature of trial by trial of the tasks that people do. But the problem with those is that you engage the system in one mode and you never actually switch to a different mode, just in a trial by trial thing. So have you considered that?
Sort of like mixing the demands of the different tasks together in one task, you mean?
Yes, because I believe that we test, for example, inhibition, response inhibition, and then you do a full block of trials of response inhibition. But in real life, you don't have something that says, I'm going to do response inhibition now. So the kids have to go around and do working memory, response inhibition, attention. They have to. So, but I don't see that incorporated into the many of the psychometric tests and things like that that exist, except in the video games. And in video games, it's a little bit more dynamic.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think it's a great suggestion, Julio. The design of these games has been constrained by a variety of different concerns. I mean, I think I agree with you that I think having highly dynamic, highly interactive games that mix together different high-level information processing demands is probably going to be desirable from the standpoint of measurement. You can worry later about unmixing, like how much of this is working memory, how much of this is inhibition, how much of this is switching. You can unmix it later. And what you end up with is something that actually is a better approximation to what we call problem solving, which is the kind of the scenario, the information processing scenario in which all these high level processes presumably come into action. I mean, we don't need executive functioning when we're doing routine things. We need executive functioning when we encounter novel problems, right? Yeah. And it's not just inhibition, as you say, it's not just working memory, it's not. We're utilizing all of these things in the service of solving a complex problem. The risk, of course, is that when you present this to somebody and you say an experimentalist, or you present this to somebody who's conducting a clinical assessment and you're saying, well, this is an executive functioning measure, they say, well, no, it isn't. This is but what happened to the go, no go task? What happened to the dimensional change switching task? Yeah. So I think what you're getting at is you're getting at something that's probably, kind of like 5 years down the road, if you will. But I still think that people, and I shouldn't speak for the people that are doing clinical assessment, but certainly for people who are in the field of experimental, child psychology and are interested in executive functioning, they want to see, okay, well, did you use the card sorting task, or did you use the go-no task, or did you use the NBAC working memory task? And then if you say, well, no, we use this complex game that mixes them all together, to be like, well, we don't know, like, what are you measuring? So I think part of the motivation for trying to keep our games similar, at least in a formal sense, to what you might call a rule learning game or flexibility game or go no go, is that I think still people are sort of very invested in this idea of things kind of having to look like working memory or inhibitory control tasks.
Oh, so we have one more question from, and perhaps appropriately, from Dr. Goldberg, and then we'll wrap things up. So Ben, you're allowed to talk, and just unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
I certainly can.
Very good. First, I'd like to thank Rob and Sarah for organizing this conference. I'm very glad that we're not giving a prize this year for the best presentation, because they're all excellent. One of the reasons I haven't been asking questions is that I think I would have failed the marshmallow test that Dr. Morton presented in terms of the technology to go with it. But there were all kinds of stimulating thoughts that I had through the conference. For example, with Trujillo, with all this virus going around and the COVID-19 and the antibodies that are being developed, I'm wondering if a CRISPR could somehow cut into the DNA and change the methyl CG enzyme that's at fault. You don't have to answer that. And with Dr. Durden's presentation, I really wondered, did the amygdala become large because of anxiety, or did create the anxiety, or did the anxiety enlarge the amygdala? And perhaps if autistic kids could practice more mindfulness, the cortex might decrease the amygdala. But anyway, that's why I didn't ask these questions earlier. In terms of Dr. Stevenson, I wondered if the occupational therapists are still doing sensory integration, or really has the behavioral modification of LAVAS really taken over with all of the symptomatology. But in any case, it's been a tremendous conference. I learned when I was going through Dr. Kelly's Vita about the existence of POND, the Province of Ontario Neurodevelopmental Network. And delighted that Western's program is part of it. And Rob, you're on the executive committee. So congratulations. This is a major step forward. What we've had was Maria Guetta that organized the OADD Special Interest Group. But now we have a group that is now going to be really developing interventions as well as doing the basic research. So congratulations to all the programs that are involved in POND, and congratulations to you, Rob, and to Sarah for organizing the conference.
Thank you, Ben. That's very meaningful coming from you. I appreciate it. But Also, I'd like to extend that to all of our speakers today, particularly Dr. Kelly, who I was going to say came all the way from Kingston, but really didn't go anywhere except her office. But still, thank you very much for joining us today, Beth. That was really wonderful. And the talks, I think, as Ben Goldberg said, were all fantastic. So we look forward to seeing everybody next year. And hopefully, Ben, we will be able to have more awards. I wanted to add a Ned Ryerson Award also, but we'll have to wait till next year to do that. So thank you, everyone, and we look forward to seeing everybody in a year from now, hopefully in person.